Week 11 of fantasy football season. Here's the top 36 running backs. I'm ranking this week number 1, Derrick Henry of the Baltimore Ravens. So Henry, what a season it's been in his first year with this Baltimore Raven team. And he's obviously fit like a glove. So I know this week the matchup's a little bit tougher, but Derrick Henry, he's just been matchup proof. And weekly it seems like he's finding the end zone or at least going over 100 yards. So this week at Pittsburgh in a big division ball game for first place, I think Henry goes out there, has a nice ball game. Number 2, Bijan Robinson of the Atlanta Falcons. So Bijan, he's turned the season around over the last month of the season, and he's definitely been worthy as a top 5 pick going into the season right now. So Bijan, he's catching the football out of the backfield. He's finding the end zone, and with a quarterback change, this whole offense has been great this season for the most part for this Atlanta Falcon team. So this week, even in a tougher matchup at the Denver Broncos, I think Robinson goes out there, has a great ball game. With 3, Christian McCaffrey of the San Francisco 49ers. So this week, a decent matchup versus Seattle Seahawks. It was good to see CMC back in the lineup after missing the first 9 weeks of the season, and he picked up where he left off, catching the football out of the backfield, breaking tackles, hitting some big plays. And this week versus the Seahawks with no snap restriction, I think CMC goes out there once again, knows he's healthy and has a good ball game. Number 4, Joe Mixon of the Houston Texans. So this week a great matchup at the Dallas Cowboys, and Joe Mixon, he's been the best player this season in my opinion in this offense for this Houston Texan team. We know with Collins, he might return to the lineup, which is a huge boost, no doubt about it, but Mixon has done it all, finding the end zone, catching the football out of the backfield, and he's had a resurgence, no doubt about it, this season. 5, Saquon Barkley of the Philadelphia Eagles. So Barkley actually had a down game last week versus the Dallas Cowboys, but the way that game went, where it was a lot of passing the football and the defense was turning the offense into short fields for the Philadelphia Eagles, that's why it was a down game for Barkley. And the Eagles, they were benching everyone by the fourth quarter anyway. So this week, Thursday night, usually high-scoring games, big NFC East matchup versus the Commanders for first place. I think Barkley goes out there, has a bounce-back game. 6, Devon Achane of the Miami Dolphins. He didn't have a great game last week in a plus matchup at the Rams was Achane. Still finished with 10 fantasy points in PPR league. So this week, a slam dunk matchup versus the Vegas Raiders, a defense that can't stop anyone. And Achane, we know he could do it all out of the backfield, in between the tackles, catching the football out of the backfield. And he's been the best player, in my opinion, on the offense this season for Miami. It's number 7, Alvin Kamara of the New Orleans Saints. So what a season it's been here for Alvin Kamara. He's 10 back easily all season long. And we know he, coming into the year, he was already one of the best receiving backs out of the backfield. But now in between the tackles, he's been great. Last week, he definitely left a lot of points on the board, earning the secondary of the Atlanta Falcons on a wheel route. It would have been an extra 10, 11 fantasy points for Alvin Kamara. So after a bad drop last week, he still finished with 15.5 fantasy points. This week, a decent matchup versus the Cleveland Browns. And I think he goes out there and has a good game. At number 8, Kenneth Walker of the Seattle Seahawks. So Kenneth Walker, he's been one of the best backs all season long in fantasy football. I know he missed a few games early in the season, but now coming off a bye week, 100% refreshed is a Seattle Seahawks team as well. I know it's not a great matchup at the 49ers, even though we saw Rashad White and Bucky Irvin go out there and have good games with 15-plus points each in PPR leagues. I think Walker goes out there, has another good game this week. Number 9, Kyren Williams of the Los Angeles Rams. So the numbers have dropped off over the last couple weeks with Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua back in the lineup for this Los Angeles Ram team. But this week's a good matchup with the New England Patriots. Kyren Williams, he's still a stud running back and a top 10 option weekly. And I think Kyren Williams in this one bounces back with a big performance. The last couple weeks, he still put up some decent numbers, but not the elite numbers, just the way the game scripts were going. So this week, I think, with the Rams in control most likely early and often, they're going to run more, and the production will be there. 10, Jonathan Taylor of the Indianapolis Colts. Jonathan Taylor, he's a talented running back. The only knock on him, obviously, is injuries throughout his NFL career. And this week, it's a decent matchup at the New York Jets. This Jet defense can't stop anyone. We saw James Conner in PPR leagues go over 20 fantasy points last week, and Taylor coming off 100-yard game on the ground as well. So I think Taylor once again goes out there, and he has a nice game. Number 11, Jahmyr Gibbs of the Detroit Lions. So this week, a great matchup versus Jacksonville Jaguars. Jahmyr Gibbs, talented running back, one of the best home run hitting type of backs in the league as well. And last week, he did go over 100 yards in that ball game at the Houston Texans. So this week versus Jacksonville Jaguars, I think he has another good performance. 12, Aaron Jones of the Minnesota Vikings. So Jones definitely had an injury scare last week where we saw him get carted off in the third quarter to the locker room, but he came back in the fourth, and going into the week, the Vikings expect him to play in this game. So this week in a decent matchup at the Tennessee Titans, I think Aaron Jones shows up with a nice performance once again. 13, Kareem Hunt of the Kansas City Chiefs. Kareem Hunt, he's been great for this Chief team since he signed up week 4, week 5 for Kansas City. Carson Steele got the first shot at the running back position. He couldn't do much, had fumble issues, and then Kareem Hunt came in, and ever since then, he's been the starting back. So 13, 18 fantasy points weekly he's been putting up. And this week, a pretty good matchup with the Buffalo Bills that give up the most fantasy points to running backs on the season. We saw it last week. Buffalo got torched on the ground by Jonathan Taylor. So weekly running backs have been putting up good numbers versus Bill defense. And I think Kareem Hunt will go out there once again and get his numbers. 14, James Cook of the Buffalo Bills. So Cook, it's been a great season. And it just seems like some weeks he's on autopilot and he's still going out there and putting up fantasy points. So last week he found the end zone in that ball game at the Indianapolis Colts. This week, not a great matchup versus Kansas City, where their run defense, for the most part, has been good throughout the season. But James Cook, he's a dual threat out of the backfield. I think they lean on him a little bit more in this game, especially if Mari Cooper's out once again. Is Buffalo to keep, obviously, Kansas City's offense off the field. And Cook, weekly, he's a top 10, 15 option. 15, Josh Jacobs of the Green Bay Packers. So Josh Jacobs, he's been a workhorse all season long for this Packer team. And now this Packer team coming off by getting healthier, getting refreshed with the offensive line. Jordan Love getting healthier, coming off a groin. I think Jacobs, even in a tougher matchup with the Chicago Bears, where their run defense, for the most part, has been decent this season. I think Jacobs in this offense going to Soldier Field have a good performance. 16, Breece Hall of the New York Jets. So Breece Hall, his numbers have definitely dropped off the last few weeks here. He's failed to reach more than 12 fantasy points in PPR leagues in the last 3 weeks. A good matchup this week, no doubt about it, versus the Indianapolis Colts. But this Jet team, they like passing the football a whole lot. This Jet team ever since the Davante Adams deal. So a lot of mouths to feed, obviously, over there in New York. Garrett Wilson, Davante Adams, Aaron Rodgers loves having the football in his hands and making plays. But Breece Hall, we know he's a good receiver out of the backfield. And this Jet team, I think they should set up more screens and find ways to get Breece Hall the ball, obviously, in the passing game. So this week, I'm all the way down on Hall, even though it is a good matchup versus Colt team. 17, David Montgomery of the Detroit Lions. So this week, a good matchup versus the Jaguars. Last week, it was a down game offensively for this Lion team, but still found a way to pull it out and get the victory with their defense leading their offense into good field position and Jake Bates being the hero. So last week, Montgomery did find the end zone on a screen touchdown. But besides that, he didn't do much. But this week in a great matchup where they're going to run a whole lot versus Jaguars, I think he bounces back with a better performance. 18, Chase Brown of the Cincinnati Bengals. He's the man over there now for the Cincinnati Bengal team. I know they brought Khalil Herbert in at a deal with the deadline with Zach Moss out for the season with the neck injury. I know Leonard Fournette coming in for a workout, but even if Fournette, let's say, signs, he hasn't been in game shape in an NFL game in a couple seasons. Well, last season, I know he was with the Bills, but he was on the practice squad. So I think Chase Brown, his job is safe, and he's a dual threat catching the football out of the backfield between the tackles. And he's on a great offense with Joe Burrow. I know it's not a great matchup at the Chargers, but he's still a good option. 19, DeAndre Swift, the Chicago Bears. Last week, a down game for Swift. But Swift, he's been great for the majority of the season besides the first 2-3 weeks of the year. So this week, tough matchup versus a pretty good defense of the Green Bay Packers coming to town. And I think Swift, they got to get him the football a little bit more in the passing game. Easier passes will make it easy on Caleb Williams to get that football out quicker. And for this offensive line, not to cover as long as well, because Caleb does have a problem holding on to the football too long, where that's where the play breaks down and he gets sacked in the backfield or turns the football over, rushing it. So this week versus the Packers, I think more screens and quick hitting passes is the way to go in this one. 20, J.K. Dobbins, Los Angeles Chargers. So definitely Gus Edwards took some of the work from Dobbins last week. Dobbins still out-touched them 18-10, and obviously if they're down in ball games, they're going to have to throw more. So this could be a potential high-scoring game between the Cincinnati Bengals and the Chargers. And J.K. Dobbins, he's a talented running back. The only knock on him has obviously been health. But weekly, I still think he goes out there. It could be a decent option. 21, Robinson Jr. of the Washington Commanders. I believe he's going to come back in this ball game. He had limited practices so far in the light practices leading into Thursday night. And we know this Commander team could use him, obviously, in these short yardage and goal line packages, even though Austin Eckler within the goal line's been decent in the last couple starts. He's been banged up with the hamstring injury, And even if he plays in this game, I don't think he's going to be 100%, but still, goal line, even if he gets 70, 80 total yards and a touchdown in this game at Philly, it's obviously it's a solid performance. 22, Tony Pollard, the Tennessee Titans. So Tony Pollard, it's been a nice bounce-back season in his first year with this Tennessee Titan team. In between the tackles, he's been better than I thought this year. And even receiving the football out of the backfield, he's been well. But the only thing, Tyjae Spears, he's back in the lineup. He's going to take some of those passing downs. And if they're down early and often this week versus the Minnesota Vikings, his ceiling might not be that high, is Tony Pollard, where Tyjae Spears will be in there and passing downs and third down work. But Tony Pollard, like I said, he's still getting a good workload. Even if this game's out of hand, I still believe he'll get those 15, 18 touches and just work his way into production, because with 4 teams on bye, and obviously the running back position at the back end in the top 25 gets weaker. Pollard's still a number 2 back for fantasy owners. 23, Ramondre Stevenson of the New England Patriots. So last week was a down game for Stevenson in that one at the Chicago Bears, and rightfully so. That's a good defense, no doubt about it. And teams, they're going to load the box and force Drake May to try to beat him. So this week, I think that's going to be the game plan for the Los Angeles Rams. And I thought the Rams last week did a good job in that one on Devon Achane. So I think Stevenson, his ceiling isn't that high. I know he's had a couple 20-plus fantasy games in the last month, but this week versus the Rams, I just don't think he's going to do much in this game. And if they're trailing early and often, he hasn't been a huge factor in the passing game like you would like to see from Stevenson as well. 24, Najee Harris of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So this week, a tougher matchup versus Baltimore, where they've been good versus the run this season, but the problem where they've got gashed for the most part is through the air. So Najee Harris, we know he's not going to catch the football out of the backfield. Jaylen Warren looks finally healthy, and he's getting some of the workload as well, where he's a third down back and passing downs back for this Pittsburgh Steelers team. And this could be a ball game where it's up and down the field, and where they're going to have Jaylen Warren in there more often than not. So this game, Harris is still going to get his touches, but I just don't like the ceiling as much for him, because if he's not scoring a touchdown, he's not really a receiver, like I said, and it's all obviously relying on rushing yards. 25, Nick Chubb of the Cleveland Browns. So the same type of thing like Najee Harris. Nick Chubb's not a receiver out of the backfield, and if he's not getting a touchdown, his numbers aren't going to be great. But the only thing is he's coming off bye, which is a plus. And also it's a decent matchup at the New Orleans Saints, where Bijan Robinson just went in there, had a big game. So coming off a bad knee injury, obviously, we saw Chubb for a few games, and then they entered the bye week. Maybe he'll be rejuvenated, and now that he got his legs under him and got some game action the last few games for this Brown team, maybe Chubb will surprise and have a better game. But from what I've seen so far this season, and like I said, he's not going to be in the passing game, and if they're trailing early and often, he's just going to lose snaps off of that as well. 26, Travis Etienne of the Jaguars. So Tank Bigsby, he's banged up. I don't know if he's going to play in this game. He left last week. He didn't return. And this week, it's going to be a game where they're going to be down early and often. But the thing with Etienne, at least he's a receiving back out of the backfield. But with Mac Jones in there, quarterback, I don't trust many options in this Jaguar offense besides Ingram and maybe Etienne for a little bit. I don't see high ceilings for many of these players on Jacksonville with Mac Jones in there, a quarterback in a pretty tough matchup versus a good defense at Detroit. 27, Audric Estime of the Denver Broncos. So it looks like Estime is the starting back in the back tone right now for this Denver Bronco team. Last week he had 14 carries, 53 yards. Monte Williams, he only had 1 touch in that ball game and a catch. And Jaleel McLaughlin, he's just a change of pace back and third down back at times. So Estime, physical in between the tackles. We know throughout his career, Sean Payton likes using many backs, and we know he likes those younger backs more than a guy like a Javonte Williams or Jaleel McLaughlin, where you know you're going to get from them. We saw it early with Alvin Kamara in his career. He threw him right into the fire. He looked good with the Saints. And now Estime, he's thrown right into the fire. And this week it's a decent matchup with the Falcons coming to town. 28, Rico Dowdle of the Dallas Cowboys. So this week, not a great matchup versus the Houston Texans. I know Gibbs and Montgomery had decent games last week versus defense, but the Texans' game plan is going to force Cooper Rush to try to beat him in this game. And if Houston gets off to an early lead, the Cowboys will have to abandon the run, even though Rico Dowdle's a decent receiver out of the backfield. And let's be honest, Ezekiel Elliott, Dalvin Cook, they're both done, and it gives the Cowboys the best chance to make plays and possibly score touchdowns. So this week versus Houston, I think it's a low ceiling because they're going to be trailing early and often. 29, Alexander Madison, Vegas Raiders. Madison, I think he's the better back between him and Zamir White. He catches the football out of the backfield where White, is pretty much in between the tackles and a goal line back. And if they're trailing early and often, White's not going to see much of the field, where at least Madison could do a little bit of everything, even though his ceiling's going to be low. So Madison, if you're in a pinch and need a flex or a run back too, I think he could be okay this week. Number 30, Austin Ekeler of the Washington Commanders. So like I said, I believe Brian Robinson's going to return in this game, and then Austin Ekeler will be back to the backup running back, where he'll be more third down and passing down back, where Robinson obviously in between the tackle, short yardage, and goal line back. So Austin Ekeler, it's been a decent year for him, no doubt about it, with his Commander team, but his ceiling just really isn't that high. So as a backup, 8-10 fantasy point range is where he'll be, in my opinion, in Philadelphia, even though it could be a high-scoring game. 31, Jaylen Warren of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So Jaylen Warren last week, one of his best workloads of the season. And this week in a matchup with the Ravens coming to town, where I believe it's going to be high scoring. I think Warren's going to see a lot of snaps. We know he's a third down back, passing downs back, and in between the tackles as well, he's good for 7-8 touches per game. So this week versus Baltimore, where I think that he gives them a better chance of moving the football down the field than Najee Harris. It wouldn't be surprising to me if he gets a little more boost in his touches this week. Is Warren. 32, Raheem Mostert of the Miami Dolphins. He's not the number one back, and he hasn't been all season long, with Devon Achane being the man over there for Miami, and Jalen Wright even being mixed in at times. The only thing Mostert, though, still, he's got that goal line appeal, where we saw a few weeks ago he had 2 goal line touchdowns for this Miami Dolphin team. But like I said, his best days are behind him, in my opinion. Season at 20-plus touchdowns was Raheem Mostert, but this season injuries and just not good yard per carry, and Achane really emerging. This is why he's been dropped down in the list, but this week it's a decent matchup versus the Vegas Raiders. So if you're in a pinch and you need a number 2 flex option, maybe Mostert gets that goal line touchdown, and maybe he gets 10-12 touches. 33, Tajay Spears of the Tennessee Titans. So this is a ball game where they're going to be trailing early and often. And when Spears finally returned to the lineup last week, and last season we saw him a lot with Henry mix in. So this week I think he can mix in a lot. If they're down, like I said, versus Minnesota, he's going to get some receptions in this ball game, and even in between the tackles, he's going to get 7 to 10 touches. So this possibly could be a 60-40 split in Pollard's favor. So if you need someone in PPR leagues to be a surprise, I think Spears could be the guy this week. 34, Tyler Algier of the Atlanta Falcons. I think he's one of the best handcuff backs in all pro football. Last week he got a decent workload, 11 carries, got stuffed at the goal line, was Tyler Algier. But if he got in the end zone, he would actually add 12 fantasy points. So he's getting 8-12 touches per week. He's getting some goal line looks. And this week at Denver, you're going to have to find some ways to score differently than obviously just Bijan Robinson and Drake London, where Denver's expecting it and they're clamped down type of defense. So Tyler Algier this week, if you want to use him as a flex, I don't think it's a far-fetched thing. 35, Javonte Williams of the Denver Broncos. So Williams, he might be the odd man out in the backfield. Estimate he had 14 touches to Williams is 1. And I know Williams, he's only 24 years old, but his numbers haven't been great besides one big game early in the season at the New Orleans Saints. So Williams, he doesn't have much pop in the backfield. Estimate he's been looking more like the more physical and in between the tackle running back for this Denver Bronco team. And this week here, Javonte Williams, after we saw last week, for all we know, he might not get a lot of touches once again in the 36 and final back on rankings. Gus Edwards, Los Angeles Chargers, he's going to be the change of pace back, physical back in between the tackles, and possibly the goal line back is Gus Edwards. Returned to the lineup last week, had a decent ball game, 10 carries, 55 yards. And in this game, he actually could play a factor once again. If they're up, let's say, 10, 14 points, he's going to be the running back that runs the clock out over J.K. Dobbins, in my opinion. But J.K. Dobbins still the running back to have over here for this Los Angeles Charger team, where Gus Edwards, like I said, he's more change of the pace and short yardage back. So that's the top 36 running backs I'm ranking for Week 11 of the fantasy football season.